to AEF TV in association with Gerati. We're pleased to welcome Jason Harlan, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Fieldstone Africa. And Jason, firstly, welcome. Thanks for making the time to be here. It's a busy conference with lots of announcements. And we're talking a little bit off air, and one of the things that I've picked up on in terms of the announcements and so on is you've released an investment index around renewables.
Yes.
And there are quite a few of these indices around, but you don't release an index without coming at it from a different angle or trying to showcase something else. So what is it that you were trying to do with that index?
Well, actually, it was born out of our, we're students of the game. We are energy related and have been focused on energy in Africa for 20 years now. And part of our observation is there were a lot of academic indices measuring renewables, measuring the ability to develop and complete renewable projects.
In a theoretical realm.
Yeah. And we're very much practitioners. We live and die by the success of the projects and our clients' projects and our ability to structure things that are attractive to debt and equity. So our take on it is quite practical as opposed to theoretical. And we mixed the infrastructure, the virtual part, with the actual experience and what we knew on the ground. And we've done transactions in 52 countries in Africa out of 54. So I think we had a pretty good basis to decide and bet which countries really had the potential to consummate things.
And can you pull out some of the highlights? Because I really like the way you've sort of organized the index, and I do Google for it because it's got. It's a bit like the Gartner Magic Quadrant. You've got your winners and you've got your could do better and so on. It's
right. I think we didn't trust ourselves to go to where we disapproved of things, but we approved of things in various measure. And we start with the category of the Big Five, which are the countries where we see a possibility of investing at this moment in projects and being successful based on legal infrastructure, intangibles, political will, variety of 5 weighted factors. And then we actually only got 4 in our Big Five because we found that there was such a spread in our rating between the top 4 and the next tier down, which we call honorable mention, that we thought it would best to limit ourselves now. And then next version, which comes out in 4 months, it could very well be that we end up with 6 in our Big Five. So it's very much a rolling index, and it's a measure of our, I think we all have in the industry a joint desire to see things happen and these to go forward. So we have the Big Five, the honorable mention, and then we have little gems, which are smaller markets, which certainly limit the scale. I mean, one of the misconceptions I think about investors going into Africa as well, the countries are all virtually the same. These are countries with around 10 million and less in population, with smaller needs in their grid based on GDP, that nonetheless allow things to go forward, and we call those the little gems as a third category.
And what, in terms of the Big Five and so on, I mean, what is the common narrative? Because you've got an event like this, and I've interviewed a number of ministers who are saying, okay, we want the investment and so on. But can you give an overlay of some of the DNA that needs to be in place?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting you're talking to ministers about it, because fundamentally, and there's no way around that now, I think it will evolve to be less of a role, but there is a commitment on the government's part in each of these countries to actually have something happen, and a decision that the advantages of proceeding with a renewable program can help bridge the gap in terms of energy production and make sense. So that translates into a commitment, a financial commitment, in the sense the government stand behind offtake for these projects, or permit projects to go ahead with offtake that's privately arranged. But that kind of general will is something that is just the sine qua non. Nothing happens without that. Then there's a number of other steps, and we see in the honorable mention a number of countries that have the will but are now implementing regulations and legal infrastructure that allow this to go forward.
So is that a little bit like the framework of, because there are a number of factors at play here. The cost of renewable technology, particularly PV, is falling dramatically.
Yes.
Battery storage, affordability of battery storage is also kind of crossing that axis a little bit, especially when you look at moves like what Tesla are doing and so on. That's going to drive those things down. Is there not a notion or a sense where you could actually get to a point where the economics are such that, let's say I'm an industrial park, I'm just going to sort out my own energy. I'm not going to wait for the power grid to come.
I think yes. I think things are, just as the analogy being what happened with mobile technology on the telecom side, that there is a movement from a centralized system, which is the traditional mode of thinking about power plants, to more distributed power. And we see that not only in Africa, we see it in developed markets in Europe and the United States, where individual inside the fence producers can wield power to other consumers and in a crop circle, if you will,
so
method
it's a
of
campus play, that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. And I think that the possibility of doing that is obviously premised on people having the legal and regulatory infrastructure to proceed. So that's also a statement of political will when you say, yes, I'll let you produce and profit from capacity that you might consume, so you cover your own needs and actually allow you to distribute elsewhere.
And that almost goes to a sort of lighter touch regulatory framework.
Sure, it's very much the government as referee. And I think that you're mentioning the pricing, and I think that it has an interplay with that as well, in the sense that even though the governments are standing up and saying, yes, we will give support letters to start these projects, the demand, the hidden demand, I believe in most of these countries far exceeds even projections of what the demand is, because the demand doesn't exist almost because it's not tapped. It's a dream, it's not able to be measured. So the chance that you'll get to a situation with excess production in almost everywhere in Africa, and starting with South Africa, the biggest producer, but everywhere, is very, very remote indeed.
And so when you've got that you've got that dynamic, and you've got the technology price points falling so much that and again, this is a hypothetical context. You've got a commercial business, and suddenly I've got an option between. Hang on a minute, I could. There's a mine in Australia that actually signed up as an off-taker for a solar project, and it's literally getting 80% of its power from that solar plant. So that sort of hybrid thing that must be coming. There must be much more of that happening in Africa than
it is happening. It's progressing. No. It's definitely on point. The pace at which we've seen that in mining. Obviously, the mining industry currently is a little depressed. So the idea of that is probably ahead of the reality. But we will see more of that. We'll see more own production of. If you have a big box store, it's very easy to put solar panels on the roof, and all of a sudden you're your own producer.
Yeah.
That all has to be balanced, because you have utilities then who have invested in production who will suddenly have assets that might not be as uptake. But in Africa, that problem is muted by the simple fact that there isn't enough production. There is almost nowhere in Africa where, let me say categorically, nowhere in Africa where consumption is really truly meeting demand.
And if we can go down the scale, down to your little gems.
Yes.
And what is it in the little gems that you're picking out? Is that because it's?
Well, it's really the same factors that drive the big five. It's just that those projects and the ability to put actual projects of scale there is limited. But that doesn't mean that those projects are less economically attractive. It's just
it needs a different finance vehicle, or?
Yeah, no. Also, the ability to transmit the power generated on the grid might be limited. I mean, all of those things come into play. So it's a different game than many investors want to do something of scale. So I'm saying, when I mean scale, I mean 25 megawatts and up. Those would have limited amount ability to do that, and certainly 100 megawatts wouldn't come into question.
So if I rewind that and play that back in my own words, are you almost saying that actually there is an opportunity or perhaps even a need for the type of investor that will take those smaller scale projects, because we're not...
Very much so, and I think that's one of the... We still are, as Fieldstone Africa, we still are involved in many large thermal projects, and in a certain context, those make the most sense. They're able to, if there's a grid and there's demand, concentrated demand, those can be very absolutely necessary. We finished the Azura project, which is 450 megawatts in Nigeria this year, and that's a country with a huge population. But to augment that with these smaller projects, as long as the rules are such that they make economic sense, the scalability, the economic advantage of scale is not such that a smaller project can't make economic sense.
And it's also one of the nature of renewables, maybe not in the geothermal side, but certainly on the PV or wind side, that they can be modular, can't they? So a small thing, if you have a bit of vision and you stay in the game a little bit, can turn into something
right.
fairly reasonable.
Well, and I think one of the things that with the 20 years of African experience we've seen is a lot of times people want that in contexts that don't financially support very, very large things. And sometimes this incrementalism, building to cover need and expanding and proving the point, is actually very useful in making progress. The idea that you're going to cross a room by thinking about it as opposed to taking a series of steps is probably misguided.
And just as we sort of coming to the end of our time here, we are at AEF, which is in its 18th year, so it's got pedigree and so on. I know you guys have been coming to it as well. Can I ask you, what are some of the things that you're seeing this year? I mean, I've got my view, but it'd be interesting to see from your side of things.
One of the most gratifying things is I see a lot of realism and a lot of sophistication growing in the market as people have actual successful role models of African systems. I mean, in a previous life, I was a main investor in a utility in Germany, and now I see that the South African auction system is being used as a basis for the German renewable system going forward. I see that, so the market has actually leapfrogged from one where there was very little to be excited about to one where this is where the action is.
Excellent. I think on that note, we'll leave it because that's a great place to finish up on. Thank you very much for watching, and Jason, thanks again for taking the time to talk with us.
Thanks
it's been
a lot.
A pleasure.